Wayne, my uncle, my best friend, was face down on the floor, sprawled out in a pool of blood, murdered. Stepped over broken glass and bullet casings, got down on my knees, turned my uncle over, placed his face in my lap. 10 shots in his face, 5 shots in his body. Laid his head on the floor, I called 911. Screamed help. It was Michael Reuter. Told 911 my uncle had been shot. I think he might be killed. When the police arrived, I remember trying to speak to them, but my lips were shivering. I was trembling, and I stood by as my uncle was carried out of our store in a body bag. They put me in the back of a police car, drove me to the Northwestern station. Detective put me in an interrogation room, placed a tape recorder on the table, hit record. I'm Detective Boyce, December 26, 2009, 6:40 p.m. I began to tell him everything I've just told you. And when he asked me who may have killed my uncle, I told him. See, I knew the killer. And I carried so much guilt for a long time because I was supposed to be there with my uncle. I was living in a constant state of fear, paranoia. I knew the killer knew that I was the only one who could identify him. One of my best friends waited for me outside of the police station, drove me to my parents' house in the county. Tons of friends and family were waiting. My father wasn't home from work yet. When he arrived home, he innocently said, "I'll never forget, are we having a party?" He was excited at first. He loved being around people. He loved to party. Little did he know what I was about to tell him. So I had him sit down, got on my knees. I looked up at him and I said, "Dad, Uncle Wayne's been murdered." Never forget, without saying a word, he placed his hand on my head, kissed my face, and went straight upstairs to his room. After my uncle's killing, I shut our store down. Obviously, in turn, I lost my job. At the time of my uncle's death, I was also bartending nights at a college bar. And shortly after his death, the bar I worked at burned down. I remember standing out there in the cold, watching that bar burn to the ground, thinking, man, my life is going up in flames. Fast forward a bit, 2015, 16, and I'm in the hospital. I'm with my father, my family. My dad's become very ill. He had prostate cancer. Decided a family to have his prostate removed, and we did. Good, it's gonna be okay. But it wasn't. See, a few more weeks I'm in the hospital with my dad and my mother. The doctor walks in the room with that expressionless look, like you have something to say, but you don't know how to say it. And he finally looks at my dad and says, "Very sorry, sir. You have stage 4 pancreatic and liver cancer. You have about 6 months to live." He ended up living for 8. Made great memories of my father during those 8 months that I'll cherish forever, but it was also a very, very hard time. I remember sleeping many nights at my parents' house with my father on our L-shaped couch, his feet at my head, wake up throughout the night when he gets sick from the chemo. I can see him now, violently throwing up in the toilet, his bald head, skin and bones at the time. I would just stand or kneel behind him and tell him it's gonna be okay, rub his head. We did have some great times during those 8 months. Even made it to the casino one last time with my sister, my brother-in-law, and if you know the Rooters, you know we love to gamble, and that was the only day I ever gambled that truly was worth every penny lost. As my dad's health continued to decline, we eventually moved him to the hospice, make sure he could be as comfortable as possible. We were there for about 6 weeks. June 17th, 2016, I'm holding my dad in his hospice bed, surrounded by my family, as he gasped for air, just each breath getting further from the last, until one last breath, a tear dropped from his eye, and he died, gone forever. Now, the day we buried my father, the FBI charges my uncle's killer. I remember placing my father's casket in the ground and then holding my mother as we wept, prepared for a life without him. One of my father's dying wishes was to get justice for his brother's murder. I had not known this at the time, but my dad had been writing letters to the FBI, pleading for them to take my uncle's case from Baltimore City Police Department. Due to one of my father's letters, the FBI eventually took the case. We never knew this until after his death. Thought of my uncle being killed in 2009 and my father dying in 2016, the killer being charged on the same day we buried my father, still gives me chills. A few short months after my father died, his father died. Then his mother died. Then on Christmas Day that same year, we found ourselves in the same hospice where my father had died with my other grandmother. And we watched as she passed away, watching her take her last breaths in the same place we did for my father a few short months prior. Death after death, eulogy after eulogy, burial after burial. Find myself often sleeping at my mother's house like a frightened dog at the foot of her bed. It was the only place I remember feeling somewhat safe. I was always shaking, sweating, nervous, scared, anxious, living in a state of depression, genuinely afraid that I'm losing my mind, and all I wanted to do was sleep. At this point in the story, I'm 30 years old, running a successful real estate and title company. At least I thought I looked successful to the outside world, but it was all an act. I was struggling greatly with the deaths of my loved ones. Very few people knew that was just an empty shell, broken soul. I was drinking and using drugs daily to stay numb, self-medicating. I was truly plummeting deeper and deeper into a ditch. Often I'd wake up in a panic, unable to sleep, and knock, knock, knock at the door of my head. My new lifelong friend, PTSD, would show up to say hello. My head would be spinning. It's like a tornado of things blowing around in my head, and it won't stop, smacking right back there. I couldn't get the thoughts of everything that happened to stop blowing around, crashing down in my brain over and over again. Gruesome image of my uncle, the blood pooled and dried up around his body, deepest in his head. Distinct and exact memory where every hole was. Wandered off further and further into the after events, the trauma of my family, the moment I was holding my father and he passes, till ultimately he takes his last breath. The look on my siblings' faces and the pain inside them, amplifying and causing more pain inside me. Everything just doesn't seem real, and it's truly just so blurry in my head, minus the images of deaths and burials and the things that I wish would rid my head. Now it's April 28th, 2018. I find myself in a courtroom, 10 feet away from my uncle's killer. After a long struggle for justice, I stand before my family, some friends, FBI, U.S. attorneys, the killer, his family, and the judge. I began to tell the judge how the killer not only stole my uncle, but he stole my sense of peace, my heart, and my soul. I told the courtroom about my severe anxiety, depression. I told the judge how before my father died, he wrote the letters to the FBI asking them to put the murderer of his brother away forever. And I begged of him to make my father's wishes come true. Put that monster away forever so my family and I could put it behind us and begin to live again. The judge sentences the killer to 20 years in prison for my uncle's murder. During the trial, I had to relive December 26, 2009 all over again, resurfacing all the pain and trauma that crippled me for so long. So long I thought I was waiting for the day the killer would be sentenced to move on and I thought be normal again. But now that was over and I had extreme feeling of now what? So I started drinking again, socially and alone. I was in an extremely dangerous place. I'd wake up in the morning, not even taking the time to make a drink, the booze exiting my bloodstream from the night before, my body's in withdrawal. I take my shaky hands, twist the cap of a liquor bottle, turn it upside down, immediately feeling relief, stare around the room, knowing I was caught in a dangerous web, pour out whatever cocaine I had left from the night before, roll up a dollar bill, do a line, alcohol calmed my nerves, cocaine's got me charged, high and buzzed, ready to start my day. I knew I could only continue down that road for so long before I lost everything or even potentially lost my life. It's now a few months after the sentencing of my uncle's killer. I'm laying on the couch in my house. The dope and booze are no longer working, shaking, crying, certain that I'm going insane. I call my mother to come get me. She comes right away, as she always did. I get in her car. She's driving me to the hospital. I remember my whole left arm was numb. From the tip of my fingers, top of my shoulder, I was a nervous wreck. Worried I was going to die, truly. And I'm promising to my mother, this time's going to be different. If I can survive this time, you'll never get another worrisome call from me again. Now, after being at the hospital for a few hours, I tell the doctor I want to go home, but for fear I may hurt myself, he makes me stay. I wake up the next day in the emergency room, August 23rd, 2018, and that's the day that changed my life for the better. That's the day I decided to ask for help. 6 days after I left the hospital, I went to a well-known recovery center called Father Martin Ashley in Haverty Grace. I had individual counseling, group counseling, a doctor, psychologist for my PTSD, anxiety, grief, depression counseling. And this was the first time I ever really talked about my father's death, my uncle's murder, what I saw, what I went through, how it impacted me, how it made me feel. The first time I ever talked about PTSD, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. Before, it upset me to no end to think about people knowing I was depressed, mentally ill, that I was self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. When I talk about this now with people, they say, I had no idea. I feel bad. I wish I could have helped. But the truth is, nobody could have helped me because I became an expert at hiding it. I was an expert at portraying business as usual. I was placing so much stress on being the energetic, charismatic, outgoing, business as usual Michael Reuter. I fell further and further into depression. For way too long, I hid from my problems. But when I decided to seek help, change my attitude, mindset, most importantly, talk to others about death, trauma, anxiety, grief, I found an endless amount of healing power and growth. The reason I wanted to share this story is not because I enjoy talking about it, it's because I need to talk about it. The only reason I'm able to live a happy life today is because I found the courage to open up, talk about my PTSD, anxiety, depression, mental sufferings, everything I've been through, how it makes me feel. Right now we're facing this crazy pandemic, circumstances that we've never seen before. So now is the time. I wanted to remind anyone who may be suffering in silence to remember you are not alone. Sharing your story does not make you weak. Sharing your story makes you strong. Sharing my story is the only reason that I'm able to live a happy life. So don't suffer in silence. Share.